Well, the question I wanted to start with is really around how we become agents in these smart systems, how we move away from the paternalism and help to use the systems to shape the futures and the cultures and the behaviours that we actually want to live. And we've mentioned a couple of things. We've mentioned language, knowledge aggregation. I'd like to ask you, what one thing would you like to do or to see happen to help people be agents in shaping their smart contexts in the future?
I think the biggest thing is to instill curiosity. It's why I do what I do. I think it's probably why all of us on stage do what we do. And I think it's something that's kind of bred out of us, either through the education system, through social conditioning, and basically through technology messaging. Our curiosity is kind of taken away from us. And I think people need to be both aware of the nature and kind of function of systems around them, and also curious and empowered enough to open those systems up, to open the black boxes up and find out what's inside. So I think the curiosity, to me, is the most critical element. It's the beginning.
I would riff on that and start to ask for the technologies to actually be able to do that. So I think we have these feelings when we see an ad on Facebook and it's really targeted to us. It feels creepy, it feels weird, but we kind of just let it go because it's an ad. And for the most part, we don't have a way of interrogating that ad. And so I think it's both the curiosity and the technical ability to say, okay, what's going on here? Like, how is this data used? Where's the stream of the data that made this ad? And I think that takes a demand from consumers, not just the curiosity, but the demand to say, Facebook, tell me how this actually works.
Do you see that demand emerging anywhere?
I'm hoping to foster some of that demand.
Okay, call to arms. Andrea.
In this field, I'm fascinated by the rethinking at the foundations of what we are doing. And I always make a step back when I'm facing something new. And the new that I'm facing now is what I think about artificial humanities is behind, is something that could be called digital humanities, but humanities made numbers. So as the French call it, I think it makes much more sense when they say numérique. So it's numbers, you know. We are using numbers to code. And we know that in doing this, we are losing data. And we don't want to lose data. Mainly not information. Maybe we collect all the information, but we are losing the connectivity. So we are losing the metadata. And losing the metadata, we are using the human experiences linked to the things that we are putting into the code. And it is scary. It is scary because we are losing so many things. And code, when we call it numbers, it seems that it is politically correct, but it is not. It's heavily cultural influenced. It means that there is a decision. And unfortunately, this decision usually has not a vision, which is even worse. Because if you have a vision and you work for that vision and you organize the heritage in order to get what you want to get, it's safe and you can be proud of it. But if you don't really know what you are working on, it becomes a bit unstable. The instability is when we speak about humanities without knowing what humanities is. Humanities is about the citizen, you know. The first one who coined the term humanities was Cicero. And he coined it to make the perfect citizen, the orator. And it was the education of the perfect citizen. And sometimes we can read a lot about digital humanities, but nothing is about real life. Nothing is about the citizens. Nothing is about the future, as you would say here. He was interested in the future of his nation. And how to be interested in the future of the nation without thinking of the education of the nation. And what do you want to form, first of all? You want to form the leaders, the future leaders of your nation, in order to give a future to the nation itself. And now we are getting into artificial humanities. because we are into it. And artificial humanities will work very, very well if we will be able to humanize the code. And humanizing the code is not making him feel happy or sad, but is making the code not losing experiences, human experiences. We have a lot in our present. And what I would like is to preserve not as much as possible for the future, but all the useful stuff that we can preserve. Sorry, I've been long, but anyway. It's my job to teach and to speak, so don't blame me. I'm paid for that.
No, I would like to sort of explore this more. So, smart for whom, actually? Is it to nurture our leaders? Is it to nurture our pregnant women? Who are we designing these smart cities for, smart lifestyles for? But before we go on with that, who from the floor has questions? Because actually we only have a short amount of time and I don't want to hog the space.
Will rule-based society actually help or bring challenges for making a smart nation? Will it actually help more or pave more challenges? Also, I want to ask if, because there's also this thing about like a culture, heritage, and technology. So I'll be actually very brief to actually ask this, but will this whole technology actually pave the way for, as a form for political propaganda?
Thank you. I think that's a very pertinent question. And I wonder if Scott would want to pick it up, having started with bad behaviour.
Bad behaviour. How is that associated with me? I think, well, I mean, I would sort of take the politics and give it a small p. I mean, I think one of the things we're realizing today is that politics is not simply the sphere of kind of what we would think about as government and civic life. Politics is by and large corporate in many cases today, because these two layers actually coexist together. And we have to start asking ourselves, is it not only sort of the tool for governmental and civic propaganda, but more importantly, what are we being encouraged and nudged into doing on behalf of the people who create these technologies? One of the biggest beneficiaries, of course, of smart cities are the people who are the companies who make the software, the networks, the routers, the services, the consulting that install these. It's no accident that this age of smart cities has come on the tail end of growth from the more kind of micro-scale internet of getting us phones and connectivity in our own homes. You have to scale up and deliver infrastructure at a higher level, in part to continue to push capital through the system. So I think we have to ask, not just is it a kind of tool of propaganda, everything in a way can be a tool of propaganda if misused, but how do we sort of define politics in the next era, I think is going to be quite critical.
I think that's going to be a fascinating one to see for the next generation, how the way in which we take control of our futures is changing.
Yeah. So I'm saying that, thinking of propaganda, so propaganda is broadcasting, isn't it? So it's nothing bad in broadcasting a policy, if it is a good policy. Nothing bad, but what about the good policy? How can you decide if it is good or not? And it is a matter of what you want to get. It is a matter of, it is called in the data system, it is called wisdom. It is the top. A little underneath, you have knowledge, you understand, but you don't know how to use it, to make it useful. You understand everything very well. A little lower, you have information. And down behind, you have data. Pure data are useless, completely useless, like heritage, completely useless. If you don't have a vision, and if you are not able to make a good political propaganda of your vision for your citizens, you are done.
I mean, I go back to the kind of frictionless, you have a smooth interface, everything is kind of working behind the scenes, and everything's kind of removing some of the friction. And I think in most cases, historically, we've been able to say that's propaganda. You can point it out and see it and understand that that's what it is. And I think when it starts to become embedded in the systems and in the technologies, whether it's the way that Silicon Valley is wanting to propagate some kind of business model or a government implying that into a technology, it's, I think, going to be harder to recognize, especially when it's kind of seamless.
It's a very interesting question. Do you actually need that friction or the sort of the clash that Scott was talking about to help uncover what's going on behind the scenes? Is there another question here? Yes, please.
I think for a smart nation to succeed, we need the people to be smarter. So when we think about the culture and the values that Singapore has, I think there's a value that, I love the discussion about it, is that we outsmarted. And that's part of the heritage that we have. We didn't get to where we were by being smart. We got to where we are now by outsmarting. And smart has always been sort of incremental, whereas outsmart is exponential. So is there a value that we think is important to ensuring that smart nation succeeds? And is there a value we should cultivate? And to Sarah's point, we are a rule-based society, but outsmart gets us around the rule-based society.
I think this is an interesting question to get to in the context of sort of curiosity.
I think we cannot have the value per se in smart nation. You know, smart nation is something that you use to do better what you want to do. But if you don't know what you want to do, from where do you start? So technology comes from science, and knowledge comes from the wisdom of your vision. I keep on repeating it because it seems that it's not in the loop, but it's quite essential. If not, you keep on reading books without knowing why. Are you wasting time? or what? Why do you read books? Among the millions of books, why do you open a book and read it? Having a reason why you do things, I think, is very important.
I mean, in the kind of concept of outsmarting a system, I think what I was trying to get at in that story was trying to pinpoint what was actually happening and trying to maybe start to subvert it by using cryptocurrency or trying to get behind the system and not be tracked. And I think there's a certain degree of that as being the way that we start to interact with these systems. But again, it goes back to the curiosity question. Like, we have to actually want to figure out how to outsmart the system to understand what the system is actually doing.
And I think if we find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to outsmart systems, we're in a bad place.
Yeah.
You know, foresight isn't necessarily a value as much as a kind of practice and a way of sort of thinking about the world. And it's something that Singapore is world famous for and does, you know, in amazing ways. It's embedded throughout society. And I think that value of, or valuing foresight and bringing it to the surface allows us to get ahead of the systemic development and not simply be reacting to the type of changes happening around us. And taking the curiosity and using it for the purposes of thinking forward and imagining not only what could be, but what you'd like to be, what you want to be, and using that as a kind of key value.
Thank you very much. Thank all of you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.